Welcome everyone to today's webinar, How Clinical Asset Management Can Be a Source of Stability in an Age of Uncertainty. I'm Alan Condon with Becker's Hospital Review. We'll begin today's webinar with a presentation and we'll have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing it into the Q&A box you see on your screen. We look forward to hearing your questions. Today's session is being recorded and will be available after the event. You can use the same link you used to log into today's webinar to access the recording. At this time, I'm pleased to introduce our presenters for today's webinar. Doug Folsom is the President of Cybersecurity and Chief Technology Officer at TriMedX. Doug provides strategic technology leadership in the areas of software, applications, information technology, solutions, and cybersecurity. Doug has nearly 30 years of information technology leadership experience. Previously, he held positions at Kohl's Department Stores, Sterling Commerce, and the Spiegel Group. Dave Klumpy is the President of Clinical Asset Management Solutions for TriMedX. In this role, he leads TriMedX's Clinical Asset Management business unit, including fleet informatics, asset informatics and planning, asset utilization services, and asset lifecycle management services. Prior to joining TriMedX, David served in leadership roles at MedAssets and Broadlane, where he created and led the development of a suite of supply chain management and technology services for several of the nation's largest healthcare providers. At this time, I'm pleased to turn the floor over to Dave to begin today's presentation.
Thank you all very much for joining us today. What I wanted to do was just preview the agenda, provide some introductory comments about market trends and what we're hearing from our clients about the challenges they're facing related to COVID. Doug will then provide an overview of medical device cybersecurity, and I'm going to follow up with a discussion about clinical asset management, and then we will have time, obviously, at the end for back and forth Q&A. So what I'd like to start with is talking a bit about what we're hearing from the marketplace and our clients. So there are several key trends here that we've highlighted that serve as a backdrop for today's discussion, and we'll really put those or these trends into two kind of major themes. The first being increasing cybersecurity risk, and obviously for today's conversation, talking about the cybersecurity risk associated with your connected medical equipment. And then ongoing cost and margin pressure, which is not new to all of you on the phone, obviously, but with the recent COVID experience, this has really heightened a lot of the challenges that organizations have around their gross margin. So just to chat first a little bit about cybersecurity. So I think we're all aware, as consumers, that cybersecurity threats continue to grow. We actually had more cybersecurity threats in calendar year 2019 than the sum of the last 4 years. From a medical device cybersecurity perspective, this is becoming an even greater concern simply because of the growth in the number of connected medical devices in your organizations. Today, within our client base, about 20% of our clients' clinical assets are connected to their network and are running software on those devices that are vulnerable to cybersecurity. All indications are that that percent of your medical device fleet that is connected is going to increase dramatically to close to 70% within the next few years. There's a talent gap here in the industry overall related to cybersecurity in general, but as Doug will talk about, this is particularly acute and really a new space as it relates to medical device cybersecurity and kind of the bridge and historical gray space between what is the responsibility of the clinical engineering staff versus IT staff in an organization to manage connected medical devices. On the cost and margin pressure side, we obviously are hearing from our customers the incredible pressures they have been under and are suffering from even more related to COVID. What is adding to that is the care redesign that's ongoing with consumerism and the need to engage patients where they want to be cared for. So there clearly is a trend for care to continue to transition out of acute care settings to other patient settings, and both Doug and I will touch upon that as we go. So these trends and challenges elevate, from our view, the need for a comprehensive clinical asset management and cybersecurity program that's driven by best-in-class technology. As we're building our solutions, here are a few of the key points that we're focused on as a business that Doug and I will reference really throughout our comments today. On the cybersecurity front, simply understanding your inventory, knowing what you own and what is connected and what software is running on those devices is fundamental to understanding your risk profile. Having staff that are trained both in clinical engineering and IT is a new, unique competency that our market requires. We will talk about that. Medical devices are not generally the same as IoT devices, which Doug will get into. So in other words, a HVAC unit or an iPad on your network and the way that you manage that is fundamentally different than a medical device that is providing patient care, that is regulated by the FDA, and the OEMs have to validate any change to the software on those devices is a unique requirement of medical devices. And then understanding how those medical devices are intended to communicate with a client's network, meaning what is kind of normal traffic versus what is just noise, is a unique challenge for medical devices and requires a highly sophisticated approach to filter out noise and really focus on true vulnerabilities versus just normal traffic. Vulnerabilities continue to occur all the time. Unfortunately, in our industry, there really is no place for you as a provider to subscribe to a place for kind of an amalgamation of known vulnerabilities to software. This is a unique competency that our team has created to create that library and source of truth for that information that Doug will speak to. And then, as I mentioned, medical devices require OEM validation for any software change. So there's a constant effort needed to chase the vendors for needed OEM patches and all the advocacy that goes around that, which again, Doug is going to spend some time talking about. On the cost side, capital is constrained, which increases focus on what the true useful life of a clinical asset is. And then understanding utilization. I would imagine that many of you in the COVID era, as you are planning for capacity and understanding peak demand, it's put an increasing emphasis on not only understanding what equipment you own, but where it is in your environment and is it actually in use or not. So these are not necessarily new issues, but the recent pandemic and needs of organizations to balance capacity and demand have brought that even sharper into focus. And then lastly, there are a lot of variables to consider when planning for capital assets, including these new cybersecurity threats and variables that between Doug and I will touch on today. So with that intro, I'm now going to hand it over to Doug Folsom, our President of Cybersecurity and our Chief Technology Officer. He'll provide an overview of TriMetX and spend time talking about cybersecurity. Doug?
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate the intro. And what I'll do here is, as Dave mentioned, I'll take a few minutes and kind of talk about TriMetX, our background, and the offerings we put together and how they all kind of fit together. So first of all, TriMetX has been around since 1998. We actually started as an in-house biomed shop. So we really come out of the provider background, not an OEM, not a manufacturer. We're independent. That independence, not trying to sell equipment, gives us a level of credibility in the marketplace. We've expanded. You can see our coverage there, very broad, and we've established a significant amount of scale. So as we continue to expand our offerings, we started as a base biomed clinical engineering shop, and now have really expanded into true clinical asset management, cybersecurity, and other facets that are key in this space and frankly often neglected. So with capital expense and the capital constraints Dave mentioned, what we see typically is 25 to 27% of capital spend at a system goes into that clinical asset inventory, adding inventory. What that obviously does downstream is drive additional operational expense in the future. We end up with more equipment. There are more settings of care, driving ultimately to higher CapEx, higher OpEx, growing the risk of the environment if it's not appropriately managed. And what we've done is really create these three key blocks that are called out here. One is clinical engineering. It's really best in class based on best practices. We have our true clinical asset management, which provides that visibility and asset lifecycle piece that Dave will talk about later. And then the device safety and security, which is all tied together through a proprietary workflow and analytics platform. So here you have kind of the breakout. What we do with the clinical engineering is it provides the visibility into the environment. It reduces OpEx day one and provides that best practice that has been honed over the last 23 years, into a turnkey solution. And that really includes regulatory environment of care information and right through supply chain and preventive maintenance practices. It truly is a best-in-class solution. The clinical asset management piece gives us views into utilization. It really manages that entire life cycle. And what that does is help our clients manage that CapEx that was mentioned in the first slide, and ultimately control OpEx as well. But having that understanding of how equipment is used, what level it's used to, and where it can be better utilized is key. And that will, again, Dave will cover that here in a little bit. The connected device safety and security really improves the security posture of the system as a whole. Frequently, we've seen, and I'm sure if there are any CISOs or CIOs on the call, they know that it's an often neglected area because of the things Dave mentioned. The uniqueness of the medical device, the dependency on OEMs, as more and more equipment becomes connected to the network, it becomes a larger and larger exposure. So this is the solution that we've put in place. So we've partnered, we have a technology partnership with a company called Remediate, which is a medical device security platform that sits on the network. And it really is a discovery. It helps inventory. It understands what potential risks are out there. It understands what the normal behavior for a piece of medical equipment is, and can identify any anomalies and take action. So this identification of assets, kind of a comprehensive detection and provisioning of these medical devices, presents a significant improvement in security for our customers. And then when coupled with our back-end processes, clinical engineering processes, that provides the services around it to really ensure we get an integrated and proactive security posture and ecosystem. It really is a key component and a key complementary piece to clinical engineering, especially as we see more and more IT and clinical engineering functions merging. So really our entire ecosystem here is intended to drive action by our customers. So building on our clinical engineering expertise, we really have two offerings. We have CAM Advanced, Clinical Asset Management Advanced, and our Cybersecurity Advanced offerings. Medigate helps us, our partnership with Medigate helps us really unlock the data based on that network traffic, and then we wrap our best practices around that in terms of value-added services. There are 7 key components that drive that advanced solution, and it includes benchmarking data, utilization data, real-time cybersecurity monitoring, the TriMedics risk scoring, which I'll cover in a little bit, our medical device profiles or model control profiles that Dave alluded to, our rudder score, which Dave will cover, and resources as needed to deliver all these services. By combining those asset benchmarks, we could typically reduce assets anywhere from 6 to 10% just on benchmarking data alone. As we move into utilization, we find that the average utilization of devices is 50, 60%. So in general, the fleets are larger than they need to be. And when we add the real-time cybersecurity monitoring and remediation, we get on the order of 95% identification and matching of all connected medical devices, which is a huge improvement over a manual or non-existent process. The cyber risk score, which is in the kind of lower middle part of the slide there, really evaluates the risk associated with our model control device profile. We understand what that device behavior should be. We understand the patient safety implications, and through our AEM scoring, we can tie that to risk along with any PHI exposures as well. All of that feeds what we call our rudder score, which is then generated for every clinical asset. And Dave will cover that in detail later on, but that really provides the opportunities for action. So whether it's optimization through replacement, upgrade, reallocation of that asset, or disposition of that asset. And what we can drive out of that, financial savings, whether it's CapEx avoidance or deferral, OpEx reductions, or even potentially cash in hand through dispositioning and resale of unneeded equipment. From a risk management perspective, as we move in, there's ROI that can be measured on the improved security posture given the cost, typical mitigation of cybersecurity breach in the healthcare space. Overall, we can reduce client risk, improve patient safety, and improve vendor relationships as well. So as we get into next generation clinical asset management, there's really two components, as I mentioned. There's the device safety and security component, which I'll cover, and then the rudder score and the actual asset lifecycle, which Dave will cover. So we're able to get this real-time visibility into the device inventory via our partnership with Medigate and the integration with our workflow platform. We get a full bidirectional integration, which automates the inventory, automates the population, can allow us to see locations of equipment, as well as discover undocumented devices. This really helps prepare our clients to respond to a cyber threat if there happens to be an incident, in a much better position to analyze impact, manage the OEMs, begin taking action to remediate and track that remediation very quickly, given the information at your fingertips. And again, closing the loop on remediation, one of the things Dave called out is because these are medical devices, OEMs must validate a patch. This is true even if they're running an off-the-shelf commercial operating system like a Windows or a Linux. The OEM still needs to validate that patch. So we provide a central team in my organization whose primary role is to make sure that we manage those OEMs. We advocate with the OEMs to ensure patches are validated and available for remediation. They also search dozens of sources to identify what models of medical device may be exposed to a given vulnerability that's in the wild. We also have the ability, as part of the service, we actually do apply the patches and compensating controls to mitigate any risk there. And having a formal cybersecurity program, including the threat intelligence monitoring, vulnerability tracking, and a remediation strategy, really addresses that complete life cycle and puts our clients in a very favorable position relative to cybersecurity audits as well. The TriMetX risk score really is a sophisticated and dynamic scoring, and it's based on a device-specific risk assessment. So we have kind of a library of best practices and configurations that we maintain at a make model description level. And focusing on that by device view really helps us prepare our clients to respond to any threat that might be out there. We can quickly analyze impact, manage those OEMs, and track remediation. As part of that score, we include whether the devices are capable of encryption, whether they contain EPHI, whether they're capable of having antivirus or whitelisting. And then we also tie it to that AEM risk score that I mentioned earlier. But all that generates the overall cyber risk score for every piece of equipment that's deployed, which then ultimately feeds our rudder score as well. Understanding how all this can be managed is key. Another key piece is really the continuous real-time monitoring gives the capability of lowering that noise floor that Dave alluded to earlier and understanding those exceptions and anomalies so we can drive the focus where it's needed. The way that Medigate works and the way that our integrations work, we have dramatically reduced false positives, and really we're able to focus on high-risk items and anomalies on the network to be able to respond to those. when those are detected, it generates an automated workflow and escalates as appropriate so that the technicians know that they have something critical, so we can respond in a timely fashion and prevent impact to the client. And finally, Dave mentioned there's a gap in talent, and it really has been challenging to see that as the IT and clinical engineering footprints kind of come together, we really did identify the need to develop talent in this space. So we created a partnership with a company to create specific training, and we call it the TriMedics Cyber Academy. So with CyberVista produces the content for us, we design the content, and this is something that is rolled out, standard training for really all TriMedics associates, and then there's deep dive training for any of the cyber specialists that are in the field that are in the clinical engineering space. This partnership and focus really ensures our techs are providing top quality medical device security support. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Dave and let him talk about RotorScore and clinical asset management.
Thank you, Doug. So yes, what I'll spend a couple of minutes doing now are talking about the asset management arm here of our new relationship with Medigate, as well as our historical services. What I'm going to start with is our approach to a fact-based and objective means of approaching enterprise-wide clinical asset capital planning. So there are a number of variables here that we feel need to be considered when evaluating whether an organization should keep using a given device or consider taking some action on that device. So I'll go through each of these here with a bit of a description. So with the star chart on the right, if you start on the lower left, here are some fundamental, asset inventory variables that an organization needs to have a handle on in order to build their capital plan. So the first is how old the asset is. So simply having an accurate inventory of your assets and when you installed them is fundamental. This is something that we do with our clinical engineering program. We often find with new customers that as much as half or more than half of their assets in their inventory, they don't have a known install date. And without that information, it's very difficult to plan. What we add to this, which I'll talk about a bit on the next slide, is what the remaining useful life of the asset is. Not what its depreciable life is, not what the OEM may suggest the useful life of their asset is, but what is the real world experience in how long a given asset is clinically viable and usable. So the second is repair events and then downtime to the right. So simply understanding how frequently is this device incurring failures, what's the duration of those failures, the severity of those failures, again having a central repository of all that work order history and understanding what the true serviceability of an asset is critical. Next is device criticality. The point here is that not every asset that you own, every clinical asset, has the same degree of impact on patient care operations. So if you have an IV pump that fails and it needs to be repaired, but you have a fleet of them, that would be quite different than your CT in the ED that is there and needs to be running 24/7. So we work with our clients to essentially flag their entire inventory and which devices are mission critical versus not, and that goes into our planning efforts. Parts availability, as assets age, they go through a life cycle. So when an asset is new, the manufacturer, the OEM of that device, obviously makes parts available while they're still manufacturing that device. But then eventually devices, manufacturers will send what they call end-of-life letters, meaning, hey, we are no longer manufacturing this device. And then for a period, they will provide parts, but then they will send what's called an end-of-support letter, meaning we are no longer making any parts available for that device. This is where TriMetX steps in with our supply chain, where we vet potential aftermarket sources of parts through ISO-approved third-party providers of used parts. And there will be a period where there are sourceable high-quality parts available to keep a device running, but then eventually our supply chain will inform our clients that that device is truly, at the end of its tracks, if you will, that we can no longer support it with quality parts. What we now add to the scoring that we've touched on a bit here are additional critical variables in prioritizing your assets for evaluation. So the first would be national benchmarks. How many devices do you have per bed, per ICU bed, per OR case versus other organizations that give you some comparatives to help you understand the size of your investment. Device utilization is one of probably the most important variables that is historically and continues to be very difficult to collect at scale. I would imagine that many of you during COVID, as you've had your command centers put together and you're planning for surge and capacity, you've been asking questions like how many devices do we actually own, how many are in our inventory, and then searching for utilization data, of those IV pumps or ventilators or PCA devices, what % of them are actually in use on a given day? Do we have enough? Historically, getting that information has been incredibly difficult to collect at scale. And as Doug mentioned earlier, our partnership with Medigate with the connected device information and the utilization insight they're now able to bring to equipment is a game changer from our perspective in helping organizations rationalize the size of their investment. And then lastly, cybersecurity risk. I would say, having been in our industry a little while, 5 years ago, as we were planning and having discussions about clinical equipment, the considerations around what software is on that device and is that software supported and does it have cybersecurity risk, that wasn't even part of our conversation. Today, it is central to the discussion around medical equipment. And frankly, often it's the software on those devices, not the plastic or metal, that is fundamental to how the device works. So understanding the cybersecurity profile of the software on that device, is it still supported? Does that device transmit EPHI? Does that device connect to the guest network? Is it a mission critical device or a life safety device, right? All of those variables are part of our risk score now that we factor into our planning. And then lastly, FDA recalls, right? Does that vendor, a given vendor or a given model, is it problematic? Are there numerous recalls that have been piling up on a given device? So these are all the variables that we include in our planning efforts to help our clients understand assets that they should continue to use versus those they should consider action. And we calculate all of this and present it to our clients now through what we call our Rudder score. And Rudder is an acronym for what you see on the left, meaning devices that should be replaced, devices where we should consider an upgrade because there's a software path available, assets that should be dispositioned, or assets that should be reallocated. So the way I like to describe our rudder score is this is the air traffic control that we provide over your fleet and your decision making to help you evaluate all the variables on the right and make solid decisions about what the best path for an asset is. So for example, if you have a device that is really old, problematic, parts aren't available, however, the utilization is very high, well, that's a device you're going to need to replace, right? Because the utilization supports replacing that device and it's at the end of its life. Versus an asset that is old and problematic, but the data suggests that it is not really utilized and could be disposed and net reduced from your inventory and not replaced. So don't spend new CapEx to replace it. Don't spend ongoing operating costs to maintain it. So those are examples of what our rudder score is about. What I'd like to do is share a customer example with you around one of these levers around reallocate. One of the key trends and challenges we highlighted at the top of our session is the fact that our client's care ecosystem is evolving with more and more care moving outside the acute care setting to ambulatory, post-acute, and home care settings. So as inpatient activity declines, we see providers faced with the challenge of managing their existing investment in devices and technology at those acute care settings versus these demands for clinical assets at new sites of care. Duplicating investment and inventory is obviously cost prohibitive, both CapEx and ongoing OpEx maintenance costs. So providers need to rationalize their equipment fleet and look for opportunities to strategically reallocate devices to match capacity with where there is demand. So as an example, we recently worked with one of our large academic medical center clients to do just this with high-end ultrasounds. We're able to help them identify a underutilized but high-performing and relatively new asset at the acute care site and help them reallocate it into a new open outpatient care setting, helping them avoid spending $375,000 in CapEx on an additional asset that they truly did not need. In addition, one of the trends that we have heard from our providers here due to COVID is the pretty substantial curtailment of spending on new equipment and just CapEx overall. Interactions and surveys with our clients over the last couple of months have suggested that many organizations intend to curtail their spending on new CapEx and new medical equipment by 50 to 80% over the next couple budget cycles. So with those constrained capital budgets, it means that providers must look for opportunities to extend the useful life of their existing fleet of equipment. This is where TriMedics is unique and has some great capability in that over our 20 years of being in this space, we have service and lifecycle history on more than 3 million unique pieces of clinical equipment. And we have a unique insight into what the true useful life of a given device is. So overall, on average, we're able to help providers use assets for 30% longer than national averages. And we do that through our rigorous CE program in the way that we provide quality repairs and highly standardized preventative maintenance, and then a fantastic supply chain team that, as I mentioned earlier, is able to help source high-quality aftermarket parts to support devices past that period where a manufacturer may provide support for their device. So what this enables us to do is to help clients shift the useful life of their assets, extend replacement schedules, and improve their net income by using assets far beyond their depreciable life. From a day-to-day perspective, in the work we do with our customers around capital planning, the way I like to talk about this is one of the benefits of working with TriMedics and our data and insight is that we're able to help you not replace a device too early in its life cycle versus national benchmarks and other provider experience. So the last topic I'd like to address that Doug touched on earlier that I think is one of the most fundamental in capital asset planning is to understand actual asset utilization. So the COVID pandemic has brought into focus for many providers something that I believe they really kind of knew before, but now they're realizing the import of it, which is one, they need to understand their inventory, meaning what equipment do we actually own. But then what has come into sharp focus is many providers realizing that in their command centers that they don't actually have a handle on the actual utilization of the assets that are in their fleet and knowing what devices are in use on a given day. So we see providers struggling with that objective data to know, for example, how many IBM pumps and ventilators they have in their inventory and how many of them are actually in use on any given day. So our technology-enabled solution, which Medigate now has really amplified for us with these connected medical devices, for the first time provides clients objective data on their actual utilization. In our experience, providers only use 45 to 50% of their existing inventory on any given day. And on peak days, even during COVID, we see clients with peak utilization of their assets still only reaching 60 to 80% of their capacity. Unfortunately, the lack of visibility to actual utilization can get compounded with additional rentals as well at times, as the administrative team can't refute caregiver demands for more equipment with any actual facts on actual utilization. So we worked recently with one of our very large clients during their peak COVID census and their COVID command center to help them objectively assess their inventory of pumps versus the care team's request for more equipment. We were able to show the leadership team that their actual usage of the existing pump fleet they had in their acute care settings was less than 70%, even with peak COVID census. And we were able to help them avoid a $3.75 million CapEx purchase, and then what would have been $225,000 a year of future OpEx expenses. So that concludes Doug and my comments for today. We hope this review was helpful for you to give you some things to think about your clinical engineering program, and then opportunities to advance your operational and financial performance, as well as reduce operational risks through both advances in clinical asset management and connected medical device cybersecurity. So with that, I will turn it back to our moderator, and we will open it up for questions and answers.
All right, thank you to our presenters for a fantastic presentation. So we'll now begin today's question and answer session. Please submit any questions you have by typing into the Q&A box you see on your screen. We'll try to get through as many questions as we have time for. So first question, I'm going to start off with you, Doug. We've got one audience member asked, how are you tracking the real-time location of the connected device? Is it just from the network, or do you use off-the-shelf or TLS technology?
So, yeah, ultimately it depends on the network density and network architecture of the client. But typically, we're able to provide a general location, at least a portion of a floor, based on Wi-Fi access point data. If if we're able to do that, and like I said, generally we can, that really has been shown to materially reduce the time it takes to locate a specific device, as well as reduce the number of devices that get flagged as could not locate. Additionally, however, if a client has deployed an RTLS solution, we can integrate with most of the commercial platforms that are out there and use that as well. But typically it's Wi-Fi based locating.
Thank you so much for clarifying that. And Dave, let's jump to you for the next question. Another audience member is asking, how is downtime calculated? Does it include clinical operations impacts?
Yeah, fantastic question. So the way that we approach that when we talk to our clients is we segment what we call soft down versus hard down on a device. And we track this with our analytics and in our reporting and actually give our clients visibility to this in our informatics platform. So by definition, a soft down means there's been a issue reported with the device, that we have ticketed and our clinical engineers are aware of it and are working on it. But that device can still function. It's safe for patient use, but there is something that needs to be addressed on the device. A hard down device is a device that is not functioning and cannot be used for patient care and will impact patient care operations. And again, on the hard down devices, we further segment those into mission critical versus non-mission critical devices. So my example earlier of the CT, in the ED, if that device goes hard down and it's a mission critical device, that work order path on that device within our clinical engineering ecosystem, obviously gets, the very highest priority and immediate staff response. So our technology platform, our informatics platform, which we haven't highlighted for you today, we have essentially a client portal where all the work orders, all your inventory, all of the statuses of your equipment is available there to you. So literally, if you're going into safety huddle in the morning, and you want to know, are there any mission critical devices in your organization that are hard down, that information is at your fingertips.
Great, thank you so much for that informative response, Dave. And we're going to stick with you for this next question. Are any of the Rudder score factors weighted or prioritized?
Sure, great question. So indeed they are. So all of those variables that I described earlier go into a proprietary algorithm that we've built, and they get factored really based upon a couple of major things. We tend to put the highest weight on the devices that are obviously mission critical, that the client designates. We don't designate that, our clients do. So in other words, if they've got multiple CTs, they decide which of those are mission critical, that change our escalation path and would alter, the weighting in their replacement algorithm. Obviously, the cybersecurity vulnerabilities on the device are a key variable in that weighting as well. So it is a proprietary algorithm that we use. It weights all of those variables a little bit differently. But then helps really put them into buckets, as I mentioned earlier, which we should focus on for replacement, retirement, upgrade, and so on.
Thanks again, Dave. And we're going to shoot back to you, Doug, for this next question. One audience member is asking, do you have a solution to also capture and manage medical devices that are not connected to the network?
Yes, okay. That's as Dave mentioned, that's a great question. It comes up frequently. So obviously, devices that aren't connected to the network also need to be effectively managed. So the way that we structure that, we clearly can't do real time based on network traffic. So we apply the same back-end process and teams to those devices. So they'll still have the model control profile that we talked about, all the best practices and attributes associated with that are tied to that. And the centralized cybersecurity teams still do the research and investigate, even if it's not network connected, what exposures there may be there relative to, you know, PHI or lack of encryption or anything like that in terms of risk scoring. When we do have an event in that space, the work order process is effectively the same. It's a manual kickoff instead of an automated kickoff. However, because it is a manual process, we typically focus just on high or critical vulnerabilities and less on medium-low security postures. So those are the ones that get the immediate focus. And then we tie those tasks into a work order, and the data collection, data maintenance, and so forth gets tied into effectively a cybersecurity PM to make sure that things are current relative to patch levels or associated data with those devices to make sure things don't revert if there's been some, say, out to vendor maintenance or something to ensure that the device is re-encrypted when it returns, things like that. So there is a process around it, although it's clearly a manual one just because of the type of the environment. Hope that answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And Dave, let's go back to you for this one. Are FDA recalls a simple count, or do you consider severity?
Yes. So it's both. So the frequency of alerts with a given company and a given product are a factor, but the severity of the issue indeed is weighted much more heavily. So one of the again, capabilities that TriMedics has, because we have the cybersecurity capacity and we're also a clinical engineering firm, our regulatory team that manages all of the preventative maintenance schedules on our equipment. Every state, as that folks may know, is a little bit different in how medical devices are classified from a clinical safety perspective. So we factor all of that in our algorithm, such that devices that are that are associated with the highest patient safety risk, defibrillators, balloon pumps, other life-saving equipment like that. Those are factored differently and weighted differently in the way that we bring planning recommendations back to our clients.
Thank you for clarifying that. And Dave, we're going to stick with you for this next question also. One audience member is asking, are all the IT security and utilization reporting only available with a TriMedics solution, or can healthcare providers choose individual solutions?
Yes, thank you for the question. Today, we offer this as a comprehensive solution. We always start with clinical engineering as our base, and then the additional services that Doug and I are describing today, both the cybersecurity management and clinical and capital asset management, clinical asset management solutions are part of our ecosystem. The reason that we start with clinical engineering and really include that, as the base or the core of our program is simply this: the data that are needed to comprehensively manage cybersecurity, and then the data needed to comprehensively plan for replacement and moving assets around. All of that hinges on the accuracy and comprehensive nature of the clinical engineering program, meaning that all the assets are in one system. All of the work order history is in one system. All of the execution day-to-day of data collection, data entry, keeping systems updated that support this work. It's so fundamental to having not only a quality clinical engineering program to manage regulatory risk and clinical risk around equipment, but it's also foundational to the capital planning and cybersecurity issues that we're talking about today. So again, great question. Today, the TriMedics solution is a comprehensive solution that includes clinical engineering.
Oh, that makes sense. Thank you so much for clarification there. And Doug, we're going to shoot back to you for this next question. How are you tracking equipment to reduce theft?
Okay, thank you for the question. In terms of theft, that's an interesting opportunity. What we typically see is items being tied to a patient and then transported and not making their way back to a facility. Occasionally, there are, we see actual theft. I guess we see little of in terms of equipment, but it's more lost equipment. In terms of protection for that, obviously everything is tagged. We have, for non-connected equipment, what we call a last touch process that ensures there's an inventory validation on a regular basis, and those work orders are issued specifically just to make sure it's still in the building and where it's supposed to be. If it's connected, we can get reporting on whether the network device is actually attached to the network or not. Now, obviously, those are more reactive than proactive, but you can get timely visibility of that. Other things we do to reduce risk in the event something becomes lost or stolen is ensure that if a device is capable of encryption, it's encrypted so it's not lost with potential PHI exposure on it. The other thing that we do as a best practice, wherever possible, is we change the default passwords so that if it does fall into the wrong hands, the combination of the password strength and encryption greatly reduces any exposure there. Obviously, without some sort of RTLS or RFID system to be able to track things as they go out the door real time, it's a great challenge to prevent something from actually walking out of the building.
Right. Thank you so much for expanding on that, Doug. Well, it looks like that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank our presenters for their excellent presentation and TriMedics for sponsoring today's webinar. Please enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you at future webinars.